passed the honour on to me because she couldn't be here this evening. And the award this evening goes to Robert Wolfgramm, who we wish could be here, but has been prevented from coming by floods in his native Fiji and have stopped him from getting to the airport. But the richness and diversity of Robert Wolfgramm's contribution to the arts and ministry is very hard to summarise, but I have to do it. Born in Fiji and educated there and in Australia, he spent 3 years at Avondale studying education and theology. He then moved to Victoria and studied at several Victorian universities, eventually taking out a doctorate in sociology and establishing a fine reputation as a lecturer and as a researcher. It's difficult to minimise the impact that Robert has had on his community in so many ways. He's advised governments on public policy. He's currently the editor-in-chief of the Fiji Daily Post. And if you followed Fijian politics over the last few years, you would realise what an enormous challenge that is. He is the director of the AFL in Fiji. He's editor-in-chief of the New Fijian Translation Bible Project. This last project is typical of Robert's contribution. He has always wanted to put the gospel in the language of people. Robert was introduced to music as a teenager in Sydney. He began on brass instruments and then graduated to the guitar because he noticed that when Lowell was playing the guitar, the pretty girls seemed to flock around. Then he moved to Lilydale Academy, where every avenue of popular music was stripped off him, but it couldn't stop him from listening to the music of his era. And he dived into it, experimenting with songwriting and soon turning his hand to writing Christian songs. He worked with a lot of collaborators when he came to college in 1971. Lowell was one of them. And he began to write with more depth, biblically based gospel message songs. And again, with colleagues, he wrote and scored a musical, Freedom, which was performed at college after it had undergone a series of scrutinies from concerned administrators. One of them called Robert into his office and announced, "Robert, you are the devil's disciple." But once it was staged, the music won approval from a wide audience, and some of the administrators conceded that it was a good thing. The amazing thing for me when I'm looking at this is that the Jesus music movement in the States, which we consider to be the birth of contemporary Christian music, happened at the same time. Robert was doing it when it was being born in America. He didn't borrow it from anywhere. He was a pioneer in contemporary Christian music. Robert and his friends also conducted street ministry in every town they could find: Newcastle, Sydney, Melbourne, other cities. They sang and preached, they used original music. They took the gospel and they put it into the music vocabulary of their day. They took it out of the pew and put it onto the street, literally. In 1977-78, Robert, along with Lowell Tarling, Genna Levitch, founded Galilee Records and put out an album, All My Friends Are Sinners. It received excellent reviews from Christian and secular critics, won awards, and had good airplay on several radio stations. 2 more albums followed, one a solo effort by Robert. His focus always was never popularity, but it was to find an authentic Christian voice with the highest artistic integrity. He also collaborated on 2 more Christian musicals. But it's not just in music that Robert has contributed creatively. He's written columns for Christian journals, and they were always thoughtful and creative. He's won awards for his columns. He worked on various media productions. He was working on the series Chasing Utopia, which was Gabe's final project. The Gabe Reynaud Award honours Robert Wolfgramm for a lifetime commitment to excellence in artistic endeavour, especially in the service of the gospel. His pioneering work in contemporary Christian music paved the way for the Adventist music scene of today. Bob created and played contemporary music when to do so was to invite widespread disapproval. He was marginalised for his work, but remained dedicated to his art and his God. We who follow stand on his shoulders. Because Robert's unable to accept the award this evening, we're presenting it to Genna, who will pass it on when Robert is finally able to arrive tomorrow.
You're disappointed that Robert Wolfgramm is not here. Imagine how I feel. It's very difficult to stand here before you and accept an award like this and talk about the spiritual content of a man's life, because the spirituality is such a personal thing. It's a very intimate thing. And I don't think I can really do it without making some mistakes that would be inappropriate. When I spoke to Robert this morning, I was picking him up from the airport yesterday, and I spoke to him this morning and he said, look, I'm on this little hill overlooking Andy Airport. I can see it, but I can't get to it. There's floods all around me, and overnight the bridge has been washed away as well. He said, I might make it tomorrow, but could you accept the award on my behalf and also give the speech for me as well, the acceptance speech? And I thought, that's a pretty good picture of Bob's life. He's always standing on a little hill, seeing the airport in the distance, but struggling to get there. His life has been a struggle. And you would have thought that during that struggle, at some point, his faith would have been knocked out. There's every reason it should have been, but it never was. He's waiting to get to the airport, but can't quite make it. Everything he did was difficult. He's part Fijian, part German, that's where the name Wolfgramm comes from, part Tongan. His father was brought to Australia by early missionaries, Adventist missionaries, the Stewarts, who was educated in Australia. And as it turned out, the same thing happened to Robert. He was, his mother and father were in Australia. He was studying at Australian school, doing quite well, and his father really wanted to go back to the Solomon Islands and work there. So they approached Dave Caldwell, who was the headmaster at the time at Stratford High School, and asked if he could board with them. And he agreed, and it was an opportunity that was repeated from father to son. Bob's children now, two of his boys are in Melbourne, and his grandmother's looking after them like he was looked after by his grandmother. And history seems to repeat itself. You would have thought that being left in Australia while your parents are overseas would have been a difficult thing to do, but you know, Bob lived through that. He had actually abilities that people didn't always recognise. I spoke to his primary school teacher this week who said, how come I never picked up he was that smart? He always seemed to be just a little dark boy in the corner, you know, and now he's writing these great things for the Science, he's written fabulous songs, how come I never picked that up? And I thought, well, maybe that's a secret when you're a creative person, is that you need someone who understands and picks up that talent early. If any of you in this audience are hoping to be art teachers and dealing with creative people, remember that a creative child that's growing up, if you can be given the right tools, will use those tools in a way that will enable their life to grow, their spirituality to grow, and for them to reward the community around them. It's a very valuable thing. And if it's not found, often it will turn inside and it will curdle inside as well. I met Robert when he was at high school. Lowell met him at high school as well. We remember him well, but he was at Avondale that he started to blossom. His writing skills increased, his musical skills increased as well. They tell me that Freedom and the songs that were written at that time were part of a way of getting back in the good books with administration, because they knew they started very close to the wind. Daniel mentioned this, but both Rob and I were expelled from Avondale. It's sort of a badge of honour, I guess. So what is it about art that confronts people? What is it about art that says it isn't just being pleasant and nice, but it's something that confronts you and it makes you feel uncomfortable about who you are? Isn't that what the core of life is all about? That we're jolted out of our pleasantness, out of our vanilla, white bread and butter lives, and are confronted with issues that we don't always look at? Isn't that what enables us to look clearly at ourselves and clearly at the future? I think that Robert had difficulties when he was expelled from Avondale. He had difficulties with the administration of understanding why they did it and not recognising who he was and the potential talents that he had. He drove trucks in Melbourne for a while before he went back to university. You would have thought his faith would have been quite damaged by that experience, but it wasn't. A few years later, when Des Ford lost his position, it was really under some pressure. I lost my faith at that time. And I thought Bob had as well, but he kept writing songs about the issues that existed and how to deal with them and how to deal with the real world. A lot of people lost their faith at that time, and Bob didn't. He lost a son along the way. He struggled with the government in Fiji that opposed him. He couldn't make it to the plane. And I think that as a creative person, and this audience is full of creative people, so I'm talking to a home crowd here, that the creative life actually doesn't happen unless there's some stress along the way. We're coming into the Passover season, and it's always worried me that we had to have a lamb with bitter herbs. And I looked into it once and I thought, what are these bitter herbs all about? Lamb, I understand. What about the bitter herbs? And the bitter herbs are just salad. It's lettuce. And it ain't bitter. I thought, these guys are just having chops and salad. What's the big deal? But if you let lettuce grow until it's old, until it heads up, it becomes a bitter plant. And there are times in your life when you have to taste the bitter herb. Otherwise, you don't understand the fullness of life, and you don't understand the fullness of redemption and forgiveness. I'd like to conclude by asking Ivan and Angela Cordwell to come up on stage. One of the early mentors that Robert had was David Cordwell. He introduced him to music, and also who